I think we've starting to get a few more people in now. So welcome everyone to our next Ask an Expert webinar. Today we'll be focusing on measuring and managing the impact of change in the project world. So just a reminder, if we could all keep our microphones on mute throughout the session, just so that we're not interrupting our presenters. If you guys do have any questions at the end, we will get to them, but feel free to type in the chat box and raise your hand if you do have anything urgent. As always, the session is recorded, so you'll be sent out any resources after if you need to rewatch or share with anyone that might find this interesting. But I'm going to hand over to Ryan and Mark now, who will be presenting. So over to you guys.
Thank you very much, Gemma. Okay, welcome everyone. It's Ryan and Mark again, so you know us. We are going to go through management of change within the project context. We're going to look at what change management is and what it isn't. We're going to look at how it fits into the project world. We're going to look at what you should think about or consider when you're actually trying to manage change. We're going to look at what goes wrong, and things often do. We're going to look at some options or some things you should really be doing that often is not done. And we're going to look at some examples. We don't often in these sessions look at examples, but we're going to show you some things inside the tool of what people are doing in terms of change and what is available to you there as well. And we have had quite a few questions come in, so we'll have some time for questions as well. So the more things change, the more they stay the same. This is this quote. So this only comes from the 1890s. Not that long ago, but we all know the saying. And if we think about it, whenever there's a project going on or there's change happening, how often does it not actually work out? This is a common problem people are facing, organizations are facing over and over again. The more things change, the more you manage change, the more they still go wrong. So what's the problem? Well, the problem is the people. It's always the humans behind these things. We can't quite replace you all with computers yet, because that includes us, but it is always the human factor in terms of this. So we are going to look at that a little bit.
And if you think about it, Ryan, I mean, even we as humans, we don't like change. That's why we say we like to be comfortable, and comfortability ultimately means staying where we are, not trying to change. I think it's just in human nature that trying to implement new change always comes with, a certain amount of anxiety.
There's always going to be anxiety, the unknown, and this desire to kind of revert back to the equilibrium, to what you know. As you said, it's comfortable.
Yeah.
So now, just for clarity's sake, what is change management? It's not change control, as in I want more money on my project. This is management of the change that you are bringing about within organizations. As we go through this, we are going to use a few particular references. The first one is a lot of work from the Harvard Business School, which I'm sure you've heard of Harvard. They do tend to know what they're doing in terms of change. So we're relying a lot on what they've done here. So Harvard's view of change is that it's a process. So change management is a process of guiding the organization from the beginning right through to the end. So it's an end-to-end process as well, not just something you jam on the end of a project. It's something that should be part of a strategy. So it's not just, we do a few tasks. We have a strategy, an approach to how we're going to do the change. And it's something that needs to adapt over time as well. Now, when we think of change, everyone tends to have a different lens. So either the executive or the people implementing change, they've been taught something or they think they're the most important. And there are many different processes, models, and approaches to change. There's no unified approach. Mark often has a saying where he talks about chefs in a kitchen where they're all cooking their own soup, essentially. This is worse because these people, the example basically is in the project world, organizations tend to do everything their own way, but they have some basis in the PMBOK and things like that to try and do it in some way. In the accounting world, it's very structured, very consistent as to how you will work wherever you are in the world. In the change world, you're not only using your own recipe. Mark's cooking German food, I'm cooking South African food, and we're in different kitchens. Okay, there's no common view to this. If you do a quick search on Amazon, over 6,000 books relating to change management. They're not 6,000 project management books. And if they were, they're all similar. So we have processes such as the Harvard one, Pulse, Prosky you see everywhere these days. Every vendor has their own approach. There are models to help you understand change and what should you think about in terms of change. Why does change, as Mark said, people are, there's fear around change. Why? You've got ADKAR comes up all the time. Those of you who've done, the MBA studies and all that, Kubler-Ross, Lewin, Cotter, the old ones. Boston Consulting Group is another one we're going to look at as we go through this. They have got a very strong model. And then around change, there are also all these approaches. And these days, it's very much around soft skills, around visionary leadership, around looking after people, around communication. And we're going to cover some of that off, but we're actually going to talk about the pendulums maybe swung too far to the soft side. It's time to come back to the hard side. Now, some of the hard skills are needed there as well. Okay, so if my screen will change, there we go. So if that is change management, what does that mean in a project context? Well, there's the usual structure in that we have strategy and strategic organizational change. This is broken down into objectives and initiatives that are broken down into work. This could be projects, BAU, etc. And this has an impact. Well, they have outcomes and outputs, gives us benefits. And that's kind of what we're used to. But this is where it starts going wrong. First of all, organizations are not really structured top-down so much anymore. There's very much hybrid and matrix models going on. People are working in different ways. So you have to start thinking about not just handing it down, handing the commandments down and saying, you shall do this and you shall change in this way. It's more about getting people involved in understanding the value and doing what Harvard is calling quests. It's we're going on a long quest to Mordor to go and take care of something. And we all buy into it. And this is really what it's about. It's about a bottom-up or an open source approach to strategy, and the change becomes part of that. Now, if you can't quite do that and you are thinking about benefits, and we talk to a lot of people about benefits all the time, the one thing that's always missing in these discussions is that where does the change come in? So yeah, we're now measuring benefits, and that's all I want to do. Are you measuring the change as well? And are you continuing? Because if the change breaks down, you'll lose the benefits anyway. There's no point in measuring benefits all by themselves. Now, this concept of going on a quest, it's about executives engaging the people, the workers, in coming up with understanding the change and planning out how they're going to manage the change themselves. It's open source, and it leads to a much higher understanding of change. Now, I bet you everyone on this call has either been the guilty party or the person on the receiving end of this. You bring about change, you communicate what's going to change, you have a meeting, the CEO has a meeting, explains it all. Then a week later, someone asks a really dumb question and you're like, were you in that meeting? We've actually just explained this and we've had it in our own company. And you think that person's stupid. Well, it's not actually. Top-down communicated change, as the seniority decreases, by the time you get down to workers, they have a 20% understanding of that change if you're communicating down and they're just listening. If you get them involved in planning out the change and being involved in all of that themselves, they have a 60% understanding. Still not perfect, but a much greater understanding of what's actually going on. Okay, now, we want to know a little bit about you as we go through this. Does your organization have an actual change management function or process? We talk to lots of clients. Like Mark and I, between us in a month, we'll talk to 20 different clients, very often about change. Sometimes there's nothing. Sometimes they have a change team, an actual change department. Sometimes the PMs are doing it. How are you actually doing this? Okay, let's see what's actually coming through here.
I think it's also fair to say, Ryan, that the larger the organization, the more recognized change or formal change management is embedded. And we always make the example of that. The small organization where you have the ability to communicate in one room and everybody is on the same picture. I think the larger the organization is, the harder it is. That concept of over communication shows that also in the top down method, where passive listeners and not active contributors.
Exactly.
Yeah, when we look at the polls right now, close to 60% of of our polls participants say that they have change management teams in place. I'd love to hear
That
at the end.
surprises me, actually.
Yeah, me too, actually. That's why I'd love to hear the discussion at the end of how other organizations are actually not only approach the implementation of change management, but how do they determine success? What's that final term of, yes, that was a successful deployment, or this was a successful change? So that will be interesting in the discussions.
Those are interesting. Only 17% saying no. It's okay. It's a lot. Things are better than I thought. However, the more things change, the more they stay the same.
Yeah, and just to stay true, only 23 respondents out of 47 participants. Come on, guys,
don't be shy.
Better. You can do
Don't
better.
Be shy. We get excited about the feedback. We love the numbers. We see the little ticker go up there. Okay, now, so let's say you are managing change through the projects or through, in your case, 56% have got a change team. Well, what we've got on the board here, on the screen, is in blue, the general approach to change. This is based on Harvard's generic model. We've added a little bit to it. The purple, I'm going to provide some additional commentary, which is commentary from Gartner and from Sensei as well. So first of all, you start off, you have to actually prepare. Now, remember, we want not just a top-down, we want this inclusive open source approach here, this quest. So start by actually enabling workers to manage their own change. Don't do it to them. Then you've actually you want a quest, so you've got to get them into that vision. You've got to plan it out. So here's the one thing of failures that people often don't plan the change. It's after the fact we do some communication. They're not early on planning the change. So be open. They're all included in over there, and start planning from the business case level onwards. So maybe the people who are even going to be implementing it are coming up with this themselves, and then baseline it. So Mark's been talking about measuring. If you measure, you've got to measure against something. You've got to baseline, okay? And this is a very, Mark and I having a discussion before, very missing thing in the world around change is baselining the current state. We'll talk a little bit about that as we go on. Then we do what we tend to, most of the people in this call will focus on is implement it. We're doing projects, initiatives, BAU, and that's okay, but don't forget about the change. And then now this is usually when people suddenly start scrambling. We've got to actually embed this in there and get the change happening. But you should be measuring way before and focus on talking to people, not selling it right up front over here when you're just starting to implement these changes. Now, a bit of an example that came from Harvard was they're bringing change into an organization, big restructure, people are going to lose their job, the usual type of thing that happens these days. There was very low engagement. And what they realized was that executives were communicating and over-communicating from the top down. HR was doing all these presentations, etc. It wasn't working. Eventually, they identified key influencers through the organization. They individually, one-on-one, just sat down and talked with them, not to them. And then it started coming out what they're actually worried about. These discussions went on, very different approach. Those people then bought into the vision. Even though there would be job losses, they realized that, okay, this is going to happen. We can understand why now. We're not just being screwed by the top. And also they could understand how it was going to be as fair and humane as possible and how it was done. And they then spread influence and people then bought into this. So different approaches. Don't just tell people from the top. Okay, now, if that's our process, so we need to change our process slightly. There are a few things that Harvard says you must do. Remember, I said that don't just go to the soft side, which is where the world's tend to go on to. You need to think about some of the hard factors that they believe are missing.
Yeah, what constitutes success, right?
Essentially, it comes down to, I'll go through this in a second, but what constitutes success and how you're going to measure that, okay? You need to then communicate the importance of the measurement. So people understand not just the importance of the change, but the importance of why we're measuring. When you then see these results coming back, you must react quickly. The world has changed. You can't just, we'll measure every 2 months and we'll then deal with them. It's like, no, there needs to be, and you'll see some stuff I'll show you in the tool in a second. It's constant. When we start bringing AI into it involved as well, it's constant measurements we can have. You must react quickly and then go and remeasure. So you bring the hard factors in, so actually measuring. So you do need people bought into the strategy. You need the KPIs to measure to. So think what those need to be. You then need physical people set aside to bring about the change. It doesn't happen just because we think it's important. And then you need those physical people to have some physical tasks to do within the project to bring about the change, not just a change team. The one thing that always makes me a little bit interested or nervous is that 56% of the people on this call have got a separate change team. I don't know if the change team's on the call or just the project people, but you've got two different silos now. And it's like, well, is it a combined approach to it? You need to make sure it's a combined approach. So measure, okay, and react quickly. Now, we've said, what we said is you need change. We've spoken about, we've defined change. We have we've spoken about a model, etc. But I had a question come in saying, is the term managing change outdated? And that made me think. And yes, I think it actually is. Okay, so did a bit of research into this. So Forbes is basically saying it's not so much relevant as such. This does not mean that managing change isn't relevant. It's the approach that needs to change a little. But we're in a world where employees are, according to Gartner, dealing with change an average of 3 times a year. Some sort of change event in their organization 3 times a year. So they sit down, I think they're going to do their job and just settle into it. Well, you're not. You're going to get disrupted 3 times a year. It could be disruption. We have things like the old book from years ago, Who Moved My Cheese? I have a problem with that book. It's essentially saying you must always roll with it. But there is, and we must do more to actually help people to manage the change and support them, not just make it all their problem. So that's my issue with the book. But there is some germ of truth in this. So the world going forward is that we're facing a future where change cannot and shouldn't just be managed. Change becomes the new normal. It's no longer about the fear and about avoiding it, but by instead looking at it and saying, what's the future possibility here? What are the opportunities from this? And people need to be focusing on that. And it's more about embracing it. And the things that have changed is we used to just say we do one thing, we manage the change, and we settle down. Not anymore. The world's changing. This is not just the projects, constant projects. I know everyone's busier and busy all the time. It's more just the world around us is changing all the time. This is the new model. So leading change is not an optional skill. There was a question around this, and that it's like leading change is actually something that boards are citing, according to Gartner, as the #1 skill lacking and needed in CEOs, is can you actually lead change? The second is the digital revolution. It's about digitizing process. In the old analog world, things happen slowly. Now everything's digital. The processes are there. So we digitize. It means, and AI comes in as well, which is speeding things up and meaning that you now have to be trained and retrained, and people expect the systems to be changing all the time. But that means that you are being changed because you have to learn the new system. That doesn't have to be a bad thing. So we need to start focusing on not fearing the change, but training people in how to cope with change and how that it's about continuous learning and trusting that the technology will change. It's okay. And then we have a different working model where people are not sitting fixed. I'm at home at the moment. I'm going to the office on Friday, but maybe not for a week after that. We have people coming and going. We have non-traditional jobs. They're all still people though. So we do need to realize that it's about flexibility and support of those people. So yes, change is still relevant. The term managing change may be outdated, but it's still managing change. I think it's more inclusive now than anything else. Okay, now, so let's say all this change is going on. Mark, do you want to say something? So we're going to start the poll, and yeah.
While we start the poll, I think it's clear that digitization of our workplace has brought about a lot of change, right? And if you think about change management 10 years ago, where people maybe had to change every couple of months to if a new system, for example, was implemented, process was implemented. These days, it just is really a constant. So it'll be interesting to see what change management, what terminology will actually be used going forward. I don't know, constant change or forward change.
It's like a life skill, essentially, to me, that's actually coming about. And to me, it's really, the takeaway is that we don't do projects and change separately. We do change for reasons, such as strategic reasons, and to adapt. And I hate to say it, but pivot, the overused word of the year. And projects and work, which could be projects and BAU, is a way we bring about that change and the way we support people through it. We've got to flip this thing around.
Yeah, and look, especially now with the emergence of AI, you know, the amount of change in the workforce in the coming 5 to 10 years will be mind-blowing. It will be a new revolution, right? So that's why I'm not surprised that CEOs are actually measured these days on how well they can manage change, because that can either, you know, fail, and therefore the company's strategic goals fail, or it can be succeeding, and therefore the company is successful. Exactly. So it's interesting to see the polls here. You know, who thinks their organization is facing change fatigue, and look at that, 75%. You know, say, well, actually, yes, I actually think you know, we are in a constant turmoil of change, and I can imagine that a lot of organizations face that challenge, right?
Well, I see one person is saying, no, it's very well managed. I want to meet you.
Please speak up. Okay. Yes, please speak up.
We want to meet you. And 18% are saying, don't know, don't necessarily think about it. So that's just interesting.
Part of your day-to-day life. Yeah, exactly. And I guess that's how it almost should be. You know, isn't that the ideal situation where you don't even recognize change?
If it's successful and you don't have to recognize it, if you're tired, then it's different. Okay, now, so 79% now, it's a lot, are tired. So what's actually going wrong here? So one of the questions that came in was, why do we think change fails? And there are a lot of reasons. I actually had more slides. I took a few out on this. But to start off with, I think it's because people know it's important, but they don't necessarily do anything about it. And they don't measure that they're doing something about it is successful. If you don't measure it, you're definitely not going to do something about it. And then you just all go back to saying it's really important and we do nothing. So we're in this loop. Now, let's say you do
like benefit realization, Ryan.
It's just like benefit realization. Conceptually, yes, and the two are completely linked. Nothing is unrelated. There's also then this thing I've noticed, in that there's change activity going on, and there's all these people involved in that. There's the people who get changed, who don't always get dealt with directly. So there's not always that one-to-one overlap. And then there's the process, which is including the projects. And it's that little bit in the middle there that's where it's working. But there's actually still these separate camps and processes and people are working together. And where it really comes from is, of course, everyone always going to complain about executive support. They do the same thing in projects. So lack of executive support. So yes, no one buys in, no reinforcement, no way, but also no way for employees to feel empowered to deal with it themselves. So it's about going on the quest, not having it handed down. Okay, the executive involvement as opposed to executive support. The other interesting one I found is people complaining about only executive support, where it's top down and you don't get any input. You are told. That is a problem. This is when it's humans now, okay? Lack of communication, of course, is going to lead to misalignment. Lack of buy-in to the effort. So we got to do it. We get while we're doing it, but well, we don't get while we're doing it, okay? It's so not everyone understands this, not everyone does it, which is also often due to too much top-down driving, and then a lack of measurement to see, do they actually understand it? Just limited knowledge as to what's going on. And in terms of change management, I mean. So we all know change is important. How many people have actually sat and been trained in this or actually been involved? Now, over half of you have actually got a change team. And that is interesting. It's higher than I thought it was. So there are more people with knowledge and there's more resources than I thought out there. But it's not like it's 100% of you. There is resistance in terms of it. This is more of an organizational thing. There are some people who will tick it off and say, yeah, we got a spreadsheet. We list the change in there, but there's no actual process around it, no measurement, no reporting. So just because you create a list of tasks doesn't mean you're doing anything effective about them. And we have a lot of people who complain about, we have all this change management process and documentation, and we fill them in. but they're not inspiring, and people don't then use it and do something with it. Actually, it needs a process. It needs to be merged into the project process. Okay, so last poll. Okay. Now, who has actually got a process within the project process? So is this merged in? So that over half of you have got a change team. What I'm really interested in here is, have you got a change team, but they divorced from the project people, and the two are kind of not really engaging that well together? And both, generally when we talk to clients about that, it's the other one's fault. Of course it is. Whoever you want the other one to be, it's their fault. But yeah, who's actually got the process and has merged it in? So, okay, I've got a few,
and
half
often,
have got a process, yeah.
I mean, to the point where often the misconception is in place that project managers are responsible for change management. How often have we heard that, right?
Yeah.
And it's the same concept of, are project managers responsible for benefit realization? No, they're not. It's impossible that there can be. So that discipline is an umbrella above all of the work.
Absolutely. It starts long before the project and continues into the future of the organization. Project managers are almost, you could say, instead of being a project manager, you become a change manager for your piece of implementing the work. And it's almost like project managers are the ones doing it to people. And we need to get away from doing it to people, where we start thinking about the change. So project managers and everyone else has a role in change, but you don't say project manager sort it out. It's definitely not like that.
And interestingly enough, I mean, the PMI in particular at the moment, they're looking at how does the role of a project manager actually changes, in particular with the technology, with the forthcoming technology that will enable them to reduce their mundane administrative tasks.
Yeah.
What is the skill set of a project manager going forward? And
Exactly.
apart from team management, change management is actually one of the biggest contributing factors that the PMI even suggests project managers. Yeah, interesting.
Now, looking at the results,
only 21 responses, guys. We've got 50 people. Come on, we can do better.
There's 84
the more
people
we have,
now.
the better. The more we have, the better the results. So you can see that. Yes, but then it doesn't go anywhere, is sort of the 32%.
So they fill the form in and then they email it to their cat. That's about as effective as it is. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the follow-up that to is no, nothing. I think that is still a very common approach, especially when we implement projects. And then yes, and there if formal activity to manage change in each project. So they, again, larger organizations, I would think that they have that element of change management in every piece of work.
But over 50% have a formal change team. But look at how low those numbers are. You would think there should be a number there of at least 50%, or should be more, saying that, yeah, we've actually got it. It's only 26%.
Yep.
So that is interesting. Okay.
That is a very good point.
Okay, now, so we're coming towards the end of the slides. I'm going to show you some cool stuff. The DAS model. There's our purple Sensei DAS. So Harvard, a long time ago, looked at change and started working out what was wrong, and we've referred to that as we go. The Boston Consulting Group, if you may or may not know them, but world top consulting group, like, forget the big four. These guys are the big one, okay, as in the top one. They have taken what Harvard's done and they've developed this DAS model. And this is about introducing hard factors back in. And they're saying things you need to do. Okay, and they say it works because they measure the success of it. And 1,000 of these, what they do is they have this model, and they can then look at what you're doing and they can predict if you're going to be successful or not. Now, the way it works, it starts with duration. So first of all, if you've got a change, so the first mistake people make is like, it's a short project, don't worry about it, it'll be fine. Like, no, duration's not related to the success of change. Just because you're short doesn't mean that you won't forget about the change or why it's actually happening. And being a very long project, people tend to focus on, doesn't necessarily mean that it'll be successful. You have to be reviewing this, and they say at least every 8 weeks you need to be reviewing and measuring the change. So in fact, build it into as milestones into the project tasks. The I is integrity, it's performance integrity. It's around, do you actually plan the change? We're going to look a little bit at that in a second. So, and are you relying, of course you're relying on people for the change, but do you see how busy they are? Do you actually manage them as resources and free up the best people? It's then about commitment. The C is commitment. It's not just the executives. It's about understanding influences. It's about finding those less enthusiastic people and having one-on-one sessions to be more genuine in your communication as opposed to just top-down, okay? The concept of the shared quest we go on, top-down messaging clashes with that. And then it's about E, the effort, is about finally then measuring that, having a simple survey metric to actually to measure this and close the loop. So you need to be reviewing it. You need to actually plan it out and ensure the planning includes resource availability. You need to have commitment, and the people involved in that must feel that the sort of metric they worked out was that an executive will say, but I'm spending all my time talking about change and doing this change stuff. They need to feel they're doing 3 times more than is needed for it to actually trickle through. And then we need a simple measurement of that. So let's actually have a look, if I can get control of my screen, there we go, at some things. So what we're going to do is we are going to look at a project, and we're going to start with the duration and the performance, the planning of all of this. And what we're going to do is I'm going to just find my business case. We're going to start with a business case. So in the beginning, this is our little business case. And the business case has got, business case things happening. So they're working out what they're doing and why they're doing it. They're working their way through an approval, and they figure out their tasks and their financials and all that. But they also start thinking about change impact. And change impact changes over time. It's not just one impact. So in this case, we have April's analysis, and that itself has a workflow. This one's going through the analysis. So we can embed a guiding process as we go through. We can ensure there are checklists on the way. We had questions come through about, around, can there be a change process? Can there be notifications, approvals, gates, and things? Yes, they can. This is very easy. Well, change is measured at a time. So this is 19th of April, which was today. So we've done that. We will go down the screen and we'll see that it'll eventually work out what's the impact of this change. And it's calculated it and given us the option to actually override it if we want to. We have a link off to our reference material. So this is all that guidance and training, etc. So we know what to do. And then we have the impacts themselves. And we're thinking about the physical impact on the organization and the impact of the teams themselves. So when we look at it from an organizational perspective, there are many different types of impact that we are dealing with. So is it technology, process, people, jobs, etc. And how big is it? So how big is it and how wide is it? And what this will do is give us a rating, and this could be across multiple dimensions. But we need to then understand the teams themselves. So how are they being impacted, and when does it start and when does it actually end? So here, the project office, medium impact, this little thing is implementing ELTIS, of course you would want to do, starting today, ending for the financial year. So that's fine. We've now got a team busy working away, and we can understand the impact on the organization, understand the impact on the teams. What are we doing about it? Remember, we have, over half of you have a change team. Is that change team involved? So have you decided? Now, is there going to be a change lead? Or no, can they sort it out themselves? Is there going to be a senior change analyst? Will there be a junior one? And who will they actually be? So we start resourcing our own people onto this work. So by doing this and by repeating to do it, by creating multiple, not just one for April, we do one next month and the month after, etc. as well, we keep looking at this change. All of these assessments come in centrally, so the change team has their own place to go. They don't have to, we've looked inside a business case there, but these are all flowing in. The change team can see all the assessments and see their way of dividing. They divide the work up differently. They may not see it as projects the way you do. Maybe it's different types of initiatives to them, and they can do that. Now, eventually, we then move forward and we do a project. So just as we did on the business case, this has moved forward. The business case data is across in the project now, and we continue to do additional change impact. So we're measuring as this project continues, So now people are working hand in glove, okay? So what does this do? If you measure, you've got to see something. We want the insights. So we use Power BI for that. And the first thing we can see is who's being smashed with change. Well, the engineering area is essentially having a high impact running for the year, essentially. So there's a problem over there on that project. Now we can flip. It's going to actually be flipped to I want to see it by team or by project. So who's in trouble versus who's the guilty party. This helps us a simple matrix or heat map to understand who's feeling too much pain and should we dial this back a bit on different areas. So we look at this and let's say, like, engineers are tough, they'll handle it. So let's actually now think about those change processes. Are they being adhered to? So, okay, so those areas are busy, but what is the governance going on? So across all these different projects, we can see what change, where in the change process they actually are. We can see when they moved into that, and then we can start seeing the holes. So these projects here, these two here are into the communication stage. They're way down the track. They don't have any change lead or change analyst on there. It's like, okay, over half of you have a change team. You're not engaged in these ones. They're following the process themselves. Is that okay or not? You might need to actually look into this. You can also start to see who hasn't even started. They're into the project. They haven't even started the process. And when was the last assessment actually done? Okay, in this case, they're all in April, so they're all pretty good. But we can start seeing who has just abandoned the change as we go. We can also then on those teams see another aspect of who is being over changed. So what are the dependencies? So the engineering team, we can see all these different projects are impacting them. So the bigger the line here, the more of the impact on those areas. If you want to be successful, you're dependent on that team being able to absorb that change. Now, there are people. So remember, part of this, part of the DICE model, the I part, is that you are also resourcing your people to do the change. So here we have the actual change people, the change team that half of you have got. What are they doing? What projects are they on, and how busy are they actually? Their tasks need to be factored in here as well. So you have a resource management focus for those people. Now, so we understand the impact of the change. We are making sure it's governed. We've put people on the job, so they're actually helping here. And then we start to actually look at how this is going. Now, I apologize for my slightly messy graph because I've been putting data in here. In a real organization, much more data looks better. But we can actually start seeing project by project and team by team how these guys here, so this project, their impact is going up and down, up and down, up and down. This one, these guys are okay. They've spiked and they've come down. So maybe someone dealt with something. You can see over time what the actual impact is and how it's actually trending. Again, if you're not measuring it, you don't know if people are going to be in trouble, feeling too much. You ideally want a nice flat line on the bottom, not this very architectural looking graph over here. So as you're doing it, the very last part, the E part of the DICE model, is about getting that feedback. And what that is about is actually polling the people. And the way we do that is we go to Teams. So essentially, this is me. It sent me the system knows I'm on this project, and it knows it's that time we need to now actually poll you. And it says, okay, I'm going to ask you a few questions. So it sends me a message in Teams. So I'm engaged. It's come to me. I don't have to remember to go to it. Okay. So I can actually look at it, and I've got a nice bit of green calming in the background there. And I can say, how do I feel about this project? So generally, I can then think about how much extra work or effort do I think this is going to create for me? I'm like, well, it's going to be a lot. And how happy am I with the communication? Like, no, not so much. And do I have any additional commentary? I feel this is too much, okay? And then I can submit that. So what happens is you are constantly, remember, it's about constantly getting feedback from people, not just the change team providing feedback, it's those being changed. And what this will then give us is the ability to see how we're doing, how are we trending by our questions, by our feedback, and by department over time. We can see that on average, 5 good, 0 bad, we're 3.6 or so. coming out on this. We can actually then start seeing who are the people down to the people level that we need to go and give some support to. So we can actually see the engineering team. We could see they were in the first graph. They were the ones that were massively being over impacted. We can see their scores. We can see who's complaining. So Nate's given a lot of feedback over time. And we now have AI running in here. So it's not only saying AI is going to result in change, use AI to understand the change. AI can predict what's going to be next. So what's Nate probably going to respond as next? And they've been putting in commentary, and we can actually then work out the sentiment of that to just make sure if someone is saying it's all fine, is giving a good score, but they're then complaining in the commentary, we can start picking that up as well. So this helps us then to close the loop. So we're
sorry, Ryan.
Yeah, Mark.
Yeah. If you go back a step, there's a number of different questions that are actually forming the solution and the answers that you've just outlined come together. One is, how would board members see change, success, and accountability? Well, actually, this particular path is outlining the measurements and the sentiments, right? And this is very easily measurable. So to answer that question, Jim, this is actually a view that enables you to have that top-down capability. And then Jacob asked, well, could we use questionnaires? So you've just showed the online questionnaires, and that's actually how we collect the sentiment. And sentiment is measurable, satisfaction level, etc. So that is actually a prime example, Jacob, of how all of these bits tie together, how we digitize the ability for us to capture measurements and sentiments, and then provide that consolidated view, enabling then the executive managers to make the right decision at the right time, and maybe some corrective actions need to happen, or the change goes as planned. And then John Ryan asked quickly, is this shown that what you show right now is that out of the box? I just wanted to make sure this is only an example. We actually do have a change management pack. So if you're interested in that, you can most certainly get in contact with us, and we're happy to share that with you. So that's just quickly. These questions were actually perfect for what you've just shown.
Yeah. Oh, thank you very much. Okay, now, so bringing it to an end is actually questions. So the thing is that to sum it up, you actually have to include some of the hard factors. You have to measure, and then you can report, and you can actually react. So we did have some other questions. What we're going to do is we've got 16 minutes left. What we're going to do is just open it to any other questions. Feel free to type into the chat or unmute yourself. Go for it. You're welcome to do that. There were some questions around here. So I've highlighted the obvious ones. We'll see how we'll go through everything. Just see if we will get back to you on all these. We just want to see how we go for time. So the first one there is, can technology assist in bringing together the roles of the project manager and the change manager? I'm like, absolutely yes. So if we think of the change manager needs to know what's going on, they need to be able to influence into the project. We have technology allowing us, in the Altus tools you've seen there, or something like that, that you can merge together the work you're doing, merge together the tasks you're doing, use the surveys, use the feedback to give each other that feedback, that input that you actually need. So to me, it's not change manager, project manager. It's a shared responsibility to change the organization, to go on their strategic quest, and the tools let you do that. So away from the spreadsheets, bring it together.
Ultimately, we are digitizing business processes. So if we ask, can technology assist us? Yeah, of course, this is the enabler, but ultimately, I think it's important that project managers and change managers combine their business process and know where those touch points are. And in the project management world, that's actually quite common. If you think about benefit realization, we always draw that comparison to change management as well, where benefits are really realized at a later stage. So you do need to have those touch points. So it really is business process flow digitization.
Exactly. So we've kind of dealt with the first one. That one, can the tool perform scenario planning? Not so much for the scope for this. Yes, it can, but not for today, I think. Given that change is business as usual, how can we measure the change beyond the project focus? And that's kind of the point of it, is you have to start it long before the project. You run after the project, just like benefits. Its project is underneath change. Think of it like that. It's not change as a register in a project. It's the project is contributing towards the change. And the way we've set it up is the change team has their own place to go to manage this into the future of the organization.
Yeah, again, change management needs to be the umbrella above the work, right?
Yeah. Just seen, this looks like
just quickly,
Jacob.
Can the tool perform scenario planning? I wonder who asked that question. I'd love to hear what scenario planning in the change management scenarios could look like, and whether there are actually some participants here that have done that scenario planning.
That is an interesting one. I didn't actually interpret the question from that perspective, but that is actually good. So general change, we're planning multiple alternate portfolios, etc. Yes, but you're right. It's not portfolios; it's groups of change, isn't it? The portfolios are part of that.
Yeah, would be interesting.
Jacob has asked a question there. Could you use other data
to reduce the risk of sentiment driving you to over-communicate and over-manage the change again? If you achieved your benefits but sentiments is poor, was it a successful change? That's a good question here, Jacob. Well, hopefully intrinsically they go hand in hand, benefits, not just a financial benefit, but or a measurable benefit, but a benefit for the staff as well. So yeah, absolutely, we can use other data inputs, and again, just spinning this a little bit further. I mean, data inputs in terms of AI that has the ability to read through emails that are project related and pick up the sentiments that way. Ryan actually showcased that in the AI Ask the Expert session a couple of weeks ago. So yeah, that is absolutely possible. And yeah, look, is a benefit achieved if the sentiment is poor? Yes, it's a good question. I guess it depends a little bit on the benefit as well.
I think it depends on the benefit and how sustainable you can have poor sentiment. So will people settle down? Is it just the usual change graph that they're at the low point and they will come back? Is it also one of these you change the people or you change the people type of things, where the change, you don't have to keep all the people happy all the time. Part of that quest is we're going off to do something else now, and we may need to get some new people involved. So it just depends. So yes, depends in terms of measurement. Yeah, we just wanted to show you a survey, the concept of send it out to the people, let them provide input, but we can measure the work they're doing, just like you would measure project status as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Look, in La La Land, I'm sure that benefits and sentiments should be the same, but I don't think it's always reality. There are some changes that we implement that may not have a high sentiment. Well, reduction of FTEs is a primary.
Yeah, exactly.
Can a program or enterprise level view be provided, which would allow the view to change occurring across multiple projects? Yeah, look, Carrie, a great question, and it has to be. It's just like benefit realization. So you introduce change not just with one building block of a project. You generally introduce change as part of a portfolio of work, and that portfolio of work is generally introduced so that we can accomplish our strategy. So it is very, very important that you don't fall into the trap to think that you can measure change management on a project by project basis. You can utilize the information as a project progresses, what change has occurred, and how is that perceived. But really, the ultimate goal is to ensure that we implement our portfolio of work successfully, our big piece of work successfully, and consolidation of that information, just like benefit realization, definitely needs to be on the change management capability too. So yeah, I hope that kind of answered your questions. And then Lisa has, are you able to map change plans so you can see a single view of change across the organization? Definitely. I don't know whether we have an example, but you classify change, I'm just going to call them into categorizations. These are the categorizations that you accumulate them with, because ultimately you need to ensure that that you have that big picture and then have the ability to decomposition that.
So the reason we can do it is because the change is change is change. Change is not a subpart of the project. And the way we implement is the change stands in its own right. And that's why we're actually able to understand it across everything.
Yeah.
And so yeah, so that's Ben. Okay, sorry, Ben just answered one of the other questions.
Yeah, Ben answered the question. Yeah, I'll follow the chat. Yeah. But again, if you have any kind of questions or any kind of feedback on how this actually positively works or negatively works in your company, please open up the mic. Don't be shy. It will stay above amongst us. Yes, we will send that out. But yeah, it would, especially the group that where they said, well, our change management really works well. It would be great if you can maybe share your experience.
Yeah, what works for you?
Yeah, please raise your hand and talk. We've got another 9 minutes. In the meantime, Ryan, while this happens, maybe we'll go through another couple of questions.
Yeah. So one of them here is related. We're talking about benefits. How do you handle when the impact of a project will not be observed, measured for years? Well, the way we do it, it's not about the project is a step towards or piece of implementing the change. And it's just like we do for benefits and we do for changes. They start long before the project. They are measured long after the project. And we don't lock them away inside the project. They are they're essentially separate. They have a life of their own. That's essentially how we do that. So they're able to be stacked into the pipeline and dealt with as and when they're actually needed. And along the way in the pipeline, you have different types of work, and that's where the projects are actually coming in. How is change process?
I think you've explained it in terms of the benefit realization, Ryan, the terminology of outputs and outcomes. Right? And I think this is the same in the change management world. If you think about it, projects deliver an output that will lead to benefit. Projects deliver an output that will lead to change. That's the output, but the outcome of that is actually then managed by either the benefit realization manager or the change manager, and that definitely comes most of the times after a project is completed.
Next one there is how is the change management process integrated with the project management system? I think that's what we've shown a little bit of. The question is this out the box? This is let's call it an add-on pack that you can actually have. So as Mark said, contact us and we are happy to go through some options there for you. So, but the point is that it's not just how, it's like, is it? Yes, it is. So we are seeing change. Remember, it's about strategy, and the pyramid comes down. Change is a huge part of that. So for us, thinking holistically around Sensei's approach, which is in Altus, you've got to have change as part of it. But it's a work management system. Work is related to change, and there could be people using this thing to manage change. You don't think about the work. We don't need to at that point because that's for 5 years in the future. So it's a natural integration. Okay,
and I think it's also fair to say that every organization has organizational specific change management needs, and we need to make sure that we incorporate them. Again, mapping business process to the technology. That's ultimately what it is.
There was a question around approval processes within the change. How can these be utilized but not be blockers? Well, I did show briefly that we can have an actual approval process within the change framework. So if you think you have screens, and it's about, as Mark's been saying, it's digitizing the change process as well as just the project process, and all of that is digitizing the actual your own business process. So we can have these along the way. It's about being clever in how you implement the workflow. Don't make them blockers. Don't force people to stop. Rather use it as a soft governance. Use it as notification. Jacob was asking about, can you measure things? So yes, we can measure, are you actually moving through the change process? Or can we physically see you doing one thing, but the system says another? We can detect that. And what that will do is help us understand, are you using it and using the system? Are you following the change process, but without getting in your way? Because implementing change is a change, and you have to slowly increase your maturity on these things as well.
Yeah, and I think it's also fair to say, and you've outlined it beautifully, no technology will ever be blockers unless you make it so. It's the business process that determines, hey, do I need to have a formal tick off or a formal sign off of my framework? If the answer to that is yes, then you digitize it. So digitization doesn't mean, or formalization doesn't mean that there are blockers from a digital perspective. The question is always, are those formalization approval processes nothing else but a formalization of a particular action? Is that worth the time? Is the effort doing that outweighing the benefit? So I think that's an important part here.
Now, I want to just jump to this question here. I think we have a couple of minutes left. We have, I think, agreed that change is really important, and change is a big life skill that everyone needs. So the question is, should we consider change as a mandatory focus for all projects that has the same status as financials or a schedule? So you know, whenever you do a report, it's always financials, there's always tasks. Sometimes you're adding in, risks and things like that. But actually, if you're measuring change, how successful is the change, and benefits could come into this as well. Are we still doing what we need to do to get to the benefits? Should this be equal status as the classics, financials and schedule?
Well, Ryan, the answer to this question is actually, does the project impact people? If the answer to that question is yes, then yes, you have to have the mandatory focus on change. But let's say, I don't know, you do a project, construction project, fixing something that has no direct human interaction, then of course change management is not required in those types of projects. So I would always say projects and portfolios where the impact of those impact people, you absolutely need to have that.
Okay, now the others we actually covered in slides. We have 2 minutes left. Last chance, everyone. Anyone want to say something, ask anything? You have the mic. Spotlight is on you. Anyone want anything?
We have a very quiet audience.
We do have a
Hi,
quiet
it's Lisa.
Oh,
I'm
hi,
going
Lisa.
to talk. So as I'm looking at how you did the change area, there's a bunch of change artifacts that normally need to be developed as part of the process. Are they built into the tool, or will they be separate documentations? Like
They can
you've
be
got-
either. So imagine a world where you type stuff once. So you can type some of that in, and you can, if you actually need the artifact, the document, we can generate the document. We can let you attach a document in there if you do want a separate document. It needs to be separate. But more and more, we're seeing people are actually generating documents out of the tool. So type it once, essentially, and let it create it for you.
Yeah, because if you have it in a document, Lisa, it's always trapped in the document. What we are trying to do is through analytical capabilities, utilize the information and therefore have the ability to provide you sentiments, bigger pictures, consolidation, etc. So it depends a little bit on the need for the document.
And is there a way then to monitor stakeholders so you can see how many stakeholders are impacted by certain projects? So then you can see, this person's on a lot of working groups and there's a bit of an issue here as well, and call that sort of stuff out.
There actually is. I didn't include it in the example I showed because
when the
I just
departments
wasn't ready,
you did,
but yeah.
In the departments you did but
individual people, there's actually a resource. Think of it as like a resource dependency view.
Yeah.
We have a stakeholder register. So on these, you can actually say these people are involved, not just the resources, but actual stakeholders. So that feeds the stakeholder management side. But then as part of that, we can start looking at not just the department, but who it's the key person. I don't know, call it key person risk or something, or just the usual suspects of being overworked throughout these things, and they're not going to be giving all the right feedback, etc.
So
yes,
Lisa, as long as you ensure that the data makes sense and that these stakeholders are are associated to those change, I think any type of visualization is possible. Ryan, I'm sorry to cut you short. It is 1:30. Yes, I'd love to. I'd love the presentation. It's really good, Ryan. I think change management is one of those areas that we can talk forever and ever. Maybe it would be good to get some feedback from the audience to see whether they want to dive a little bit deeper in what we've done in terms of measurable changes. That would be good. That was really an eye-opener.
So Gemma will send the recording out to you all. Feel free to give us some feedback, and thank you very much for coming. We'll see you in the next one. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, awesome.
Bye.
Thanks, guys.